A black belt champion landed a powerful kick straight to a royal guard's face, sending his plain skin cap soaring through the air. But when a nearby ceremonial statue suddenly shifted, the martial artist's tournament training proved no match for what happened next. The onlookers stood in shocked silence as years of conceit collided with real military skill. Before we continue, do let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Also, subscribe to the channel if you respect the royal guards. In the early light, long shadows stretched across Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered with cameras at the ready to capture the famous changing of the guard. Among the crowd stood Mark Evans, sporting a stylish tracksuit and a self-assured air that set him apart. At 32, Mark had earned his reputation as one of America's top martial arts champions, boasting 3 international titles and a network of top-notch dojos across California. His Instagram read, "Unbeaten, unstoppable." In his world, a fighter who does nothing but stand is practically inviting defeat. Mark sneered as he eyed the motionless royal guard, who stood at full attention. He adjusted his custom watch, a gift from his latest sponsor, and declared, "In my book, a fighter who just stands around is just waiting to be taken down." The 4 men beside Mark, his training mates and loyal supporters, nodded their agreement. Their matching team jackets marked them as members of Evans's elite fighting team, and they naturally formed a protective semicircle around him, a formation honed over many tournament bouts. "Remember Tokyo last year?" one of them joked with a grin. "When that Swedish fighter, who claimed he was unbeatable, couldn't last 40 seconds in the ring with you." Mark's eyes narrowed as he examined the royal guard, Edward Morgan, whose bright red tunic and simple skin cap starkly contrasted with the modern glass and steel of Mark's training arena. At 28, Edward had served with honor for 8 years. Yet nothing in his impassive face hinted at the 3 tours in Afghanistan or the night operation in Syria that had earned him a quiet, dignified medal at the Ministry of Defense. "Look at that stance," Mark muttered critically. "All that fancy ceremonial rubbish will get you finished in a real scrap." A few nearby tourists glanced uneasily at Mark's group, sensing the charged atmosphere. Colonel Peter Baker, who had retired after 30 years with the Royal Marines, paused during his morning walk. His weathered features showed worry as he took in Mark's aggressive demeanor, recognizing the clear signs of a man seeking conflict. "Let me show you what a true fighter looks like," Mark announced, stepping nearer to Edward. The guard's eyes remained fixed ahead, his disciplined stillness a sharp counterpoint to Mark's fluid movements. "A real fighter is always prepared, always moving, and always alert," Mark boasted as he adopted a defensive stance, his body shifting with careful precision. "Look at this poor fellow. All the fighting instinct has been trained right out of him. In a genuine combat situation, this kind of rigidity is deadly." Tourists began forming an impromptu semicircle, some with expressions of unease, others simply curious. A German family quietly ushered their children away while the parents exchanged looks of disapproval. "Look at him," Mark said as though presenting an exhibit. "This is the difference between a ceremonial display and actual fighting. These men are performing, not fighting." He executed a sequence of rapid jabs that halted just short of Edward's face, a display of controlled skill. "Every move I make is designed for one thing: victory." Colonel Baker had now moved closer, his military bearing clear despite his casual clothes. The medals pinned neatly on his lapel caught the morning light, speaking of real battles fought and sacrifices made. His expression was neutral, yet his eyes never left Mark's increasingly combative display. Taking on the role of an impromptu ringside announcer, Mark called out, "What you're watching is the clear difference between British tradition and genuine combat efficiency." With a sweeping gesture towards Edward, he added, "These guards represent an era when standing in formation was seen as a sign of military strength." Mark's training mates had reformed into a strategic circle around Edward. Their matching jackets created a visual barrier between the royal guard and the gathered crowd, turning the public space into an ad hoc arena. "This," Mark declared, pointing to the tallest among his entourage, a man with a calm expression and hands wrapped in professional tape, "is Lucas, a 3-time international kickboxing champion and former welterweight MMA title holder. We train fighters who win real combat, not ceremonial costume contests." The crowd had now swelled, drawn by the spectacle of Mark's unexpected demonstration. A British family near the back exchanged uneasy glances, with the father placing protective hands on his children's shoulders. An elderly woman, sporting a veteran's badge on her coat, shook her head in quiet disapproval. "Watch how a true fighter moves," Mark instructed, unleashing a series of lightning-fast punches that halted inches away from Edward's torso. "Every movement has purpose. No wasted energy, nothing for show. This is fighting efficiency, built up over thousands of hours facing real opponents rather than standing at attention." Meanwhile, Colonel Baker began making his way through the crowd with quiet authority, his military posture parting the onlookers. His concern was not for Edward's well-being, but for what might happen if the guard was forced to break protocol. "The problem with military training," Mark explained in a booming voice, "is that it is built for group thinking, following orders, maintaining formation, and sacrificing individuality." He circled Edward, scrutinizing his posture with the eye of a seasoned professional. "Martial arts, on the other hand, is about personal excellence, pushing your limits to the maximum." Mark then executed a spinning kick that barely missed Edward's ear, the rush of displaced air enough to startle the guard. The crowd gasped, several people stepping back involuntarily. "Notice, he doesn't even blink," Mark remarked with mock admiration. "That isn't discipline, folks. It's the fear of thinking for oneself." He moved directly in front of Edward, hands on his hips, studying the guard's impassive face. "In my dojo, I teach people to overcome that fear, to engage with the real world." A woman, holding her young daughter, murmured, "This is disrespectful. We're leaving." And several others followed, uneasy with the growing tension. "I think we need a proper demonstration," Mark announced, his voice carrying the assured tone of a seasoned competitor. Adjusting his stance with smooth precision, he said, "Ring's theory is fine, but nothing teaches like experience." Colonel Baker moved forward with a determined look, but Mark's teammates closed in around him, forming a human shield. One of them, a stout man with a broken nose from previous bouts, placed a hand on Baker's chest and said, "Let the demonstration finish, old-timer." Baker's eyes narrowed. "That guard is not what you think," he murmured quietly. "Your friend is making a big mistake." Mark began a careful warm-up routine, stretching his shoulders and neck with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has trained hard. "The most dangerous mistake in combat," he lectured while rotating his wrists, "is to think that tradition equals effectiveness. These guards may look impressive, but they have traded real fighting skills for ceremony." "Now, for my final demonstration," Mark announced in the tone of a ringside commentator. "I'm going to show you why this sort of static defense fails against modern fighting techniques." Shifting subtly into a posture fit for competition, he explained, "In real combat, staying aware of your surroundings is essential. This guard has surrendered his awareness to tradition." Mark then began a complex approach sequence, a setup for a championship-winning strike. "This training makes you vulnerable, not strong," he warned. The crowd had fallen utterly silent, aware that a line was about to be crossed. Some stepped back, while others were frozen in place, unable to look away from what was coming next. "A fighter who can't adapt is a defender who will fail," Mark declared, his movements quickening. He unleashed a blindingly fast combination, every strike flowing into the next with years of precision. The final move was a spinning heel kick aimed directly at Edward's face. A sharp crack rang out, cutting through the quiet morning like a gunshot. Mark's foot connected solidly with the side of Edward's face, sending the plain skin cap arcing dramatically against the blue London sky. The force of the blow would have felled most men instantly, yet in a seemingly impossible twist, Edward held his ground. A collective gasp swept through the crowd before an eerie silence took over. Time itself appeared to slow as the cap flew through the air, finally landing with a soft thud on the stone courtyard. Mark quickly regained his balance with the efficiency of a trained fighter, a triumphant smile beginning to form. But his words died in his throat as he saw what was happening before him. Edward hadn't fallen. His head hadn't drooped. Instead, with a slight snap of his head, he absorbed the blow as if he had endured far worse. A thin line of blood slowly trailed from his temple, and for the first time his eyes met Mark's, filled not with pain or fear, but with a cold, focused clarity that only a seasoned combatant possesses. One of Mark's mates whispered, "He's not moving at all," as the bravado in his voice vanished for a moment. The crowd collectively held its breath. Colonel Baker had stopped his conversation on his phone, his face shifting from concern to grim anticipation. Then Edward moved, not clumsily like someone unaccustomed to real combat, but with the precise, efficient motion of a predator used to stalking targets in both rugged mountains and busy urban areas. His ceremonial rifle clattered to the stones as he closed the distance between himself and Mark, with a speed that belied his formal attire. "Now we're talking," Mark said, though the confidence in his tone had noticeably faded. "Let's see what these soldiers really know," he taunted. Edward's first strike interrupted Mark's taunt with brutal precision. It was not flashy or dramatic, just a textbook-perfect move delivered with the force of someone who had used these techniques in life-or-death situations. Mark instinctively blocked, his trained reflexes taking over before his mind could catch up, but the impact still sent him staggering backwards. Edward did not shout, posturally exaggerate, or perform for the crowd. Instead, he moved with the calm focus of a man on a mission, systematically dismantling Mark's defenses with measured accuracy. Mark attempted a counterattack, launching a kick that had earned him tournament wins on 3 continents. However, Edward caught his leg mid-air and, with one decisive move, brought Mark crashing to the ground. The impact robbed him of his breath, and his eyes widened in the sudden, humbling realization that he was thoroughly outclassed. Edward maintained his position, one knee pressing steadily on Mark's chest, firm enough to immobilize, but not to cause injury. Mark's surprise gave way to the instinctive drive to regain control, yet every move he tried was met with subtle, expertly timed adjustments that left his extensive training useless. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice calm and authoritative rather than angry. "This is over now." Colonel Baker stepped forward, and Mark's team ceased their efforts to block his approach. "I believe," Baker said in measured tones reminiscent of military precision, "you have just received a practical lesson in the difference between performing combat and living it." Mark struggled against Edward's hold, his frustration mounting. "What the hell? You can do a lot more than you're showing," he managed to protest. Baker cut him off with a steady tone edged in steel. "You have just been taught a lesson in reality. Assaulting a serviceman on duty is not taken lightly." With that, Baker addressed Mark directly. "You have just been given a proper education in the difference between fighting for a trophy and fighting for real. Your tournament skills might win you medals in a controlled setting, but on the field of real battle, your training would cost you dearly." Mark's eyes widened as he began to understand. I didn't expect," he stuttered, realization dawning that he had been completely misjudging the situation. Few civilians truly grasp what real combat entails. Colonel Baker continued, speaking not only to Mark, but also to the onlookers. Every guard on duty here is an active soldier with extensive combat training and real battlefield experience. The discipline you mistake for weakness is the same discipline that keeps them effective when the stakes are life and death. Mark, now quiet, recognized a new truth in Baker's words. Back at his post, the palace security officers quickly arrived, their radios buzzing with urgent communications. "Those men are not to be trifled with," one of Mark's training partners repeated, his earlier bravado completely gone. Baker confirmed, "Assaulting a guard on duty is taken very seriously." Edward, who had maintained his calm through the encounter, remained standing as a professional soldier, his breathing even despite the exertion. A thin streak of blood from Mark's kick marked Edward's face, but his expression stayed neutral, the same composure he had maintained during night operations in far more dangerous environments. Colonel Baker addressed the gathered tourists once more. "Remember, every one of these ceremonial guards is a fully trained soldier. Mr. Evans, as you might call him now, has just learned that real military discipline is not measured by how flashy your moves are in a tournament, but by your ability to complete a mission under extreme conditions." Mark had stopped struggling, his eyes now filled with a dawning awareness. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had once won championships, and realized they were ineffective against someone as disciplined as Edward. Later, as palace security took Mark aside for formal charges, Colonel Baker explained in a low voice, "Mr. Evans is now being processed for serious charges, including assaulting a serving member of Her Majesty's forces. The Crown does not take this lightly." Edward, having released his hold on Mark and risen with the same smooth precision as before, stepped back and resumed his position, still maintaining perfect composure despite the visible sign of the earlier confrontation. Tourists formed a respectful semicircle around Colonel Baker, their cameras lowered as they absorbed the reality of what they had just witnessed. The retired colonel stood with the precision of a man used to explaining hard truths. He gestured to Edward, who had now returned to his post with an immaculate uniform, only a slight smear of blood remaining as evidence of the encounter. "This uniform," Baker said, "is not a costume, but a symbol of the rigor and skill earned through years of service." An American tourist raised a hand hesitantly, asking, "But why do they just stand there if they're real soldiers? Isn't it a waste of training?" Baker smiled patiently. "That is a common misunderstanding. These ceremonial duties are rotated among active units. The soldier on duty today may have been on counter-terrorism operations 6 months ago and could be deployed to a conflict zone 6 months from now. Their stillness is just one aspect of the discipline that makes them effective in all situations." A palace security officer then informed Baker in a measured tone, "Mr. Evans is being formally charged for his actions and the injury to Guard Edward." Baker nodded solemnly. "Assaulting a serving soldier is a serious offense. I have asked to speak with Guard Edward, and I expect an apology will be arranged once his shift is over." Edward merely gave a slight nod, his focus unbroken, while Baker continued, "What Mr. Evans seems to have missed, and what many civilians don't understand, is that military excellence is measured differently from competitive sport. In tournaments, the aim is to show off superior technique within strict rules, but in military service, the goal is to complete the mission, often under life-threatening conditions." Baker gestured to Edward's near-pristine uniform, now marked only slightly by the earlier encounter. The ability to stand still for hours while remaining ready to act at a moment's notice. That is not a sign of weakness, but of true strength under pressure. A young local woman at the front of the crowd asked, "But why didn't he react sooner? He just took that kick without moving." Baker replied patiently, "Military protocol sets clear limits on when a guard may break ceremony and respond to a threat. They are trained to exercise restraint, to distinguish between mere annoyance and real danger." His explanation carried the authority of someone who had both followed and issued these orders. Edward's restrained response was a perfect example of this principle. A palace staff member then approached with a first aid kit, exchanged a few words with Baker, and began cleaning the blood from Edward's face. The guard's eyes stayed forward, his discipline unbroken even during this necessary intervention. Baker continued, "Standing guard here is one of the highest honors in military service. These men are chosen not only for their ceremonial precision, but also for their outstanding service records. Their caps and red tunics are not costumes. They are marks of excellence." He allowed himself a rare smile, adding, "If Mr. Evans had bothered to do his research before his demonstration, he might have found that many of these guards hold more combat decorations than any tournament trophy cabinet." As the afternoon shadows lengthened over Buckingham Palace's courtyard, Guard Edward emerged from the quarters in his standard combat uniform rather than in ceremonial dress. The military doctor who had examined him noted with approval that Edward's quick, instinctive reaction had turned what could have been a devastating blow into a mere graze. "You took it well," the doctor remarked, while applying antiseptic to the small cut. Edward simply nodded, the result of countless hours of close-quarters combat training, where efficiency triumphs over showmanship. Inside the security office, Mark Evans sat alone, his designer tracksuit rumpled, and his once confident air replaced by the sobering reality of criminal charges and the humbling lesson of being outmatched. When Edward entered, Mark immediately stood up, his body language now showing a respect that had been missing earlier. "Mr. Evans has been formally charged," the security officer announced, adding that Edward wished to speak with him before the processing continued. Edward's nod was professional, neither friendly nor hostile. For a moment, the two men regarded each other in silence. Finally, Mark spoke in a quieter tone. "Wasn't it training, though? I've worked with special forces from 3 different countries, and I've never seen anything like what you did." Edward replied simply, "We adapt our techniques to the situation." Mark laughed softly, though without humor this time. "Operational requirements, right?" He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mind if we have a word, man to man?" Edward accepted the offer, sitting with the straight posture of a soldier even in this informal setting. "I admit I misjudged the situation," Mark confessed bluntly. "I thought everything was about showing off, about being the best." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had won him championships, and continued, "I didn't understand what I was really looking at." "Few civilians do," Edward replied evenly. "That is by design. The stillness you see isn't just ceremony, it's complete control. In competition, everything is for show to impress judges and spectators. But in real combat, the aim is simply to survive and complete the mission." Edward's words echoed Colonel Baker's earlier assessment. "My job isn't to win points or impress an audience, it's to achieve objectives and protect lives." Mark glanced toward the door, where the security officer waited and asked, "Aren't they going to make an example of me?" Edward confirmed without emotion, "Assaulting a guard on duty is taken very seriously." Mark accepted this with surprising calm. "Fair enough. I deserve whatever comes next." He straightened in his chair, determined to face the consequences with some dignity. "I'm sorry. Not just for the kick, but for the disrespect before that. I failed to see what was right in front of me." Edward studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the sincerity of the apology. Satisfied, he offered a precise nod, and then stood to leave. At the door, Mark asked one final question. "When I kicked you, most men would have gone down, or at least staggered. You hardly moved at all." Edward paused, his expression unchanged, and replied, "When you faced real dangers, when you've had IEDs explode near you, a kick to the face is just another Tuesday." With that, he stepped out and returned to his unit with the same disciplined precision that had marked every moment of the encounter. Later that day, Guard Edward, his skin cap restored, stood at attention with an immaculate uniform. No sign remained of the previous day's clash, yet the tourists now approached with newfound respect. Cameras held more discreetly, their admiration more genuine. As Colonel Baker passed by on his morning walk, he paused to observe the guard and the respectful distance maintained by the visitors. He smiled slightly, nodding in satisfaction. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful lessons about respect are not taught with words, but shown through actions that reveal the truth behind appearances. What would you have done in Mark Evans's position? Would you have set aside your ceremonial display to recognize the combat veteran beneath? Or, like many, mistaken stillness for weakness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you learned something new about the Royal Guard, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind ceremonial traditions.